Thank you very much, Rel, for this introduction. Let me just share my presentation. Okay, so hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us to the session, Yes, We're Open Access and Knowledge Bases and Discovery. So let's start with a short poll. Why is open access important to your library? I'm just gonna paste here in the chat the link, slido.com, and use the code to enter your answers. Can't see my screen. Sorry. Start sharing. There we go. Okay. Hope you can see my screen now. So let's see if we can get some answers in. Any answers? No, not yet. People able to use the, oh, okay. Great. The answers are starting to roll in. Wow. Okay. Equity is a big one here. Well, I'll leave the poll open. Just feel free to keep adding your responses. I will share the list of answers once I circulate the recording. But we can see that open access has various implications and aspects that are considered in libraries on a regular basis. I hope we can address most of the topics you mentioned here in the session and shed some light on the process from Ex Libris side and from open access content providers side. So I'm just gonna move past from the slide, but I will share the answers at the end. Oh, so for the agenda today, we'll begin with an overview of open access for libraries, content providers, and vendors. We'll then proceed with the challenges of managing open access at Ex Libris. And as an example of the way Ex Libris deals with open access, Christine will present the recent additional options we have for using unpaywall to better represent open access. And then we'll proceed to learning the workflows and impacts of an open access content provider, focusing on university publishing from Charles, from the University of Michigan Libraries. Looking at the content triangle, libraries, content providers, and Ex Libris, open access impacts all the stakeholders and the processes between these triangle vertices. For libraries, managing open access stands on a large scale of interacting between the many units of the institution, from following up on scholarly communications, funding open access article processing charges, managing any CRIS system or institutional repositories, and following up on open access models, be it green, gold, diamond, subscribe to open, transformative agreements. Librarians are the mediators between the open access ecosystem on its variables and intricacies. Explaining the models and its implications on faculty members, institutional policies, and impact on tenure tracks is a position librarians often find themselves shouldering because they are information specialists. And as the people who usually pay the bills and handle invoicing from publishers, the knowledge of managing and working out open access is accumulated at the library. Content providers also manage open access models in a way that stems from legacy rights on the content. So they must also keep track on intellectual property and calculate any open access models in a way that balances the desire to increase traffic alongside financial sustainability. Opening content to the world as an open access in a way that content providers can increase usage while retaining other publishing opportunities is a great challenge and leads to carefully curated collections with various access rights. For Ex Libris, managing open access means looking at both discovery and delivery. Managing the metadata in the knowledge bases means we can maintain the information on collection level and title level, while managing open access metadata in CDI allows a more granular display, which better enables hybrid titles and collections for articles, book chapters, proceedings, and more. However, the metadata that is presented needs to be created in such a way that the open access information is embedded properly in the metadata with the proper tags. Although open access content can be available online freely, for the corresponding metadata, it might not be the case. And even if the K-BARTs are available for the knowledge base, if we want to display the metadata an article level and book chapter level in CDI, we will usually need to create a specific feed from the content provider. And looking at the different CC BY license types, sometimes we will need the involvement of the legal department, even for open access metadata. The open access acquisition models are also being managed and maintained in the knowledge base, meaning that the product need to have the ERM purposes an option to identify open access features. Open access can come from any sources, and this also presents a unique challenge for maintaining the metadata. Sometimes titles are hosted on platforms that are no longer maintained, so managing open access metadata with sustainable updates requires a different kind of effort. For these scenarios, the linking is also an issue, as one collection can have deep-level linking only if the titles are hosted on one platform. And last, the balance between opening and diversifying the knowledge bases and CDI versus making sure the titles are acceptable and reliable is a specific attribute of open access that needs to be acknowledged. Let's look at some numbers of open access in the knowledge bases and CDI. In the three knowledge bases Ex Libris maintains, ALMA, SFX, and 360 KB, there are approximately 108 collections that are entirely open access. These collections contain 282,000 portfolios, with over 30,600 activations. Some of these collections come from large academic publishers whose main business is subscribed content. But as the open access wave washed over the industry, more and more content providers either make legacy content open access or introduce new publishing agreements that present open access specific titles, hybrid titles, and even designated open access collections. The hybrid titles are more of a challenge to represent in the knowledge base, and I'll explain more in the next few slides. Once the content providers create new titles or collections as open access, it is crucial they send Ex Libris the title lists that correspond with these changes. Otherwise, there is no way to keep track of these updates. There are also content providers that specialize in open access. That is more easy to track and maintain because all the rights are the same, and institutions can activate the collections without missing out on access rights. There are also aggregators that collect open access information from various platforms, and they maintain a title list of open access possibilities. These aggregators, such as DOAJ, the Directory of Open Access Journals, are not responsible for the open access content being hosted on various platforms, and the updates they send Ex Libris are depending on the integrity of the metadata they receive from the content providers. Another type of collections that is open access but also includes free content is the miscellaneous freely available content. These collections for books, journals, or disciplinary collections have been maintained by the community in Alma Community Zone to ensure that any change or update can be performed by community members, thus keeping these miscellaneous titles tracked by a multitude of librarians. In CDI, there are 1,040 specific open access collections and 389 million open access records that can come from other collections as well. The most are patents and journal articles, but there are many more material types, such as publications, data sets, dissertations, conference proceedings, book chapters, and more. Displaying open access properly in the knowledge bases can be challenging. For example, displaying the coverage properly. Here's a real example from a title list for a random title, having 6 rows for the same title with intermittent display of paid and free content. The coverage for a subscribing institution should actually be only from 2001. See in the last line, the earliest date this title has been available. The publisher has decided to turn 2 volumes to open access for various reasons. It could have been a featured volume for a specific topic, or it could be that the authors have paid APCs for all the published content in that volume. In any case, we have 2 volumes in this publication now available as open access to anyone everywhere. This update has been added to the title list as the KBART convention states, with the letter F in the access type column, and each one in a separate row in the title list with the threshold clearly stating the free access is valid only for these 2 volumes. However, this multiple line method causes a very long coverage statement that for subscribing institutions result in a very long list of threshold statements that confuses patrons because eventually they have access from 2001 onwards. Having consecutive statements that do not represent any actual gap is confusing and may cause access uncertainty. On the other hand, libraries that do not subscribe to this title may benefit from having this title's open access volumes available for their patrons to increase content availability. But having multi-line thresholds is again confusing, and having each open access volume stated separately is hard to read and understand what the actual availability is. Multiple titles present this challenge in a way that content operations at Xlibris has several ways to address this in order to display it better for subscribers and non-subscribers. For collections that are hybrid on a title level, meaning a mixture of open access titles and subscribed titles, we ask from the providers to send 2 separate title lists, one for all the collection and another only for the open access titles. That way, subscribers activate the collection that has both open access and subscribed titles, and non-subscribing institutions activate only the open access titles in a designated collection. Some content providers prefer not to send such a title list, so this solution is not always available. Another solution is unifying the coverage statement. So for subscribed libraries, the threshold will indeed show only 1 line for this example. This solution requires development efforts and considering when the gap should be maintained versus when it should not be, when it should be unified. For this example, if there's an issue 26, volume 5, and it is not mentioned in the title list as a separate threshold line, it could mean that this specific issue is being hosted elsewhere and is not available on this platform. Unifying the coverage in such a case will give a false access statement. To accurately solve hybrid titles that host free and subscribed content, it is best to use indication on the article level in CDI, as this would be more accurate and comprehensible than a multi-line threshold, which is a solution we can use in the knowledge base. Another coverage challenge is displaying start and end statements. For DOAJ specifically, Directory of Open Access Journals, the start date is not when the journal's earliest volume is available on the platform, but rather when has the title become open access. The platform can host content before that date, which will be available for subscribers. And the end date is when the most recent article was added as open access. For the example here, the journal became open access in 2016. But the most recently added article to that platform in open access dates to 2013, because the publisher decided to digitize legacy content and upload it to the platform as open access. This gives a very confusing threshold of start date of 2016 and end date of 2013. As Dodge only manages metadata as they receive it from the content providers, there is no way to verify what the earliest and latest date possibly available for non-subscribers. The nature of open access requires different metadata management that differs from subscribed standard ERM. So the solution to these issues need to be creative and in cooperation with the content provider and the community to find the best way to serve the workflows of all stakeholders while providing the best possible representation of the metadata. Managing open access in CDI is more flexible as the open access is managed on the record level, but it is not managed on the portfolio level. So if a record is available for both a paid aggregator site and an open access publisher site, the indication is seen in the facets. We also have an indication of the open access in the knowledge bases for activation in CDI. You can refer to the documentation in this link for more information. And now for the unpaywall updates in CDI. You see?
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to say a little bit about unpaywall in CDI. Unpaywall is not really new to CDI. As many of you know, we've supported the unpaywall API for some time, and that could be used to add links to open access versions to the results in Primo and Summon if available. The problem was always that you cannot influence the availability flag with an API call. So the items in the result list would only be flagged as available if you have them active via another collection, either another open access collection or via a subscription collection in Alma, SFX, and 360. We had a lot of feedback about this, that many of you wanted to change that. You wanted to add the open access items to the filtered result list and show them really as available, even if there is no other link, if there is no subscription version or any link to another open access collection. So this is really what changed. Now we have unpaywall as an indexed collection. That means that it can be activated via Alma, SFX, or 360. And that has exactly that effect. The items from the unpaywall collections are now flagged as item available on your result list, and they're part of the filtered search. They're also part of the collection facet, or the unpaywall collection is part of the collection facet. It appears there and can be used for filtering the result list. And you also have the unpaywall open access links as open access link in record in your linked list. So if you show all links, as many of you do, you get the open access links in the full record in Primo on the bottom. The top is always the subscription link. The second one is the link to the link resolver, and the third one, the third priority, is the open access link in record. So it will appear on the bottom of the link list. If it's the only link, then obviously it will only appear on, or will appear on its own. One of the things here to mention is that, and that's because we had this problem several times, when you activate the collection in Alma, that does not affect SFX and 360. It's really an Alma thing. If you activate the collection, you have to activate it either for CDI only, or you have to unsuppress the BIP record. If you just activate the collection and you do not unsuppress the BIP record, nothing is going to happen. We had a few cases where people just activated it, they did not unsuppress the BIP record, and then they didn't see any effect. So that's important to remember. Can you move on to the next slide, please, Thomas? So a little bit about the content of unpaywall. It has about 27 million records, primarily journal articles. There are also some book chapters, conference proceedings, etc. But really the priority of journal articles, or the primary content, is journal articles. It contains different versions. As you know, really, it has a submitted version, which is not yet peer-reviewed. It has the accepted version that is peer-reviewed, but it's not really published yet. And then it has the published version. We had a lot of feedback from different people about what type of versions they would like to see or not see in CDI. And we will make a decision at one point if we should maybe change what we're doing today. At the moment, we have all the versions. If you look at researchers, a serious researcher would like to have all the versions because they want to have the content as soon as possible, as soon as it's published, really. But if you look at undergraduates, for example, they're supposed to use the published version, not necessarily the submitted version. So there are different interests here. All of those versions have their value, but we are happy to receive feedback about, what you would like to see if we need in future, for example, to have two collections. One has all the versions, one only the published version or similar. We can certainly change this in future. The content is updated twice a week in CDI. We actually harvest every day. But it's part of the CDI updates, which is done twice a week. And we're working quite closely with Unpaywall to have a flow for solving any issues with linking, open access indication, etc. You can use or continue to use the Unpaywall API. At the moment, if you don't use it, the links will be shown as any other link in record in the database or on CDI. If you use the Unpaywall API, the links are shown on the result list and they're pulled in via the API as before. It's really in addition to activating the collection, it's not instead of activating the collection. If you use quick links, the Unpaywall link will only show if there are no quick links. We did not add the Unpaywall links to quick links. It looks the same on the UI. If you don't have quick links, you have an Unpaywall link, for example, but it's not the same because quick links goes through another vetting process than Unpaywall does. That's almost everything about Unpaywall. Can you move to the next slide, Tamar, please? I just put a few links here just for your information. There's information for Primo and Primo VE. That's also about how Unpaywall is integrated in Discovery, how it can be activated, etc. And then there's the same or something similar for Summon. And I also put the link here to Unpaywall if you want to have more general information about the Unpaywall database. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Christine. So going over what we just talked, I'm opening the next survey. Take your time, and I'd be interested in hearing what are the greatest patron-facing challenges of managing open access in your library. Because I think we did speak of some challenges and how Ex Libris manages these in different ways. So do share your ideas, your insights. Give it a few minutes. Right, unreliable links is really big here. Right. Great. Keep them coming. I think that unreliable links is an issue, and it comes from how we can trust the links, who is the owner of the open access, of the content, of maintaining the platform for publishing the open access content. It's really interesting. I see links do get a lot of space here. I think the Unpaywall solution would affect managing the linking issues. Would be happy to get your feedback on that. This poll is also open until the end of the presentation. And feel free to keep these answers coming. Okay, I'll move on to the next slide. And maybe just a peek into the opportunities that open access generates to support various aspects of library workflows. Just mentioning here OER, open educational resources, that can present a solution to expensive textbooks as supporting resources for teaching and learning. And these resources could provide an opportunity to reduce dependency in high-price subscription models required for courses. And supporting these with proper collections and metadata sets are also required from the OER content providers. And we're continuing our efforts at Exlibris to reach out to such providers and increase the number of OER collections. And also, I'd like to share an interesting pilot we're currently performing using open access PDFs to create metadata for ebooks. The objective is to review AI capabilities in generating accurate and usable bibliographic records. The pilot is now at a stage of comparing AI-generated bib records with available bib records of open access ebooks, adjusting the model to receive better language, description, and Library of Congress subjects. More to come on the results of this pilot, but this is an interesting example of how open access can advance quality of bib records. And an important aspect of open access that was mentioned in the first poll is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And having open access materials from around the world brings forth content that is not always known or available for patrons. Languages, regions, disciplines can benefit significantly from being available openly to scholarly communities. And increasing the open access content in the knowledge bases and discovery can surface these resources and increase visibility for content that would otherwise not be found. So to summarize, the open access generates improvements for Exlibris on the software side, for libraries on managing the budget and promoting DEI, and for publishers to increase usage and traffic and expanding their influence on the academic world. And in a more critical view, an interview published recently in The Scholarly Kitchen titled, "Where Did the Open Access Movement Go Wrong?" brings interesting questions about the role open access has on the community of academic institutions and scholarly publications. And now I'm glad to present Charles Watkinson from the University of Michigan to share the point of view of an open access content provider.
Thank you very much, Tamar. And thank you for all the work that Exlibris is doing in this space. I'm here really representing a particular project that I've been working on with Kate McCready of the University of Minnesota. And Kate is currently visiting program officer for Academy-owned scholarly infrastructure at the Big Ten Academic Alliance. So I'm going to focus my remarks on the importance of collective action in building resilience against an uncertain future. And specifically, I'm going to take a slightly different approach around the library's role, talking about how libraries can take action at scale to foster growth in open access and build trusting relationships between librarians and values-aligned humanities publishers. So this is librarians working at the producer end to advocate for open access, as well as making discovery possible. Could I have the next slide, please? So today's topics are just laid out here. So I'm going to start with the Big Ten context. So if you could move to the next slide, please. So the Big Ten Academic Alliance is a massive consortium. Within the Library Initiatives division, Big Ten is 15 institutions, soon to be 19, working collaboratively to create the changes we'd like to see. 20% of the print materials in the United States are held by our member libraries, and the unparalleled scale and relative coherence of the BTA libraries working together means that the group has an extraordinary opportunity to influence the marketplace and to make investments in areas that align with our values. Next slide, please. So the Big Ten has named this collective work the Big Collection. And the Big Collection is a major initiative to move from managing the independent collections at those constituent libraries to build one shared and fully networked collection. And this unified collection will lead to increased access to materials, reduced storage costs, and the ability to leverage our collective buying power. Just imagine every student and faculty member with a seamless discovery to delivery access to the pool of resources we share. Another of our goals, however, is to partner to bring about the transformation of academic publishing and scholarly communication. And we call that our open scholarship strategy. That's going to be outlined in the next slide. These aims are not small. They are and will be major steps forward for our libraries in serving user communities and stewarding our resources more effectively. This is a complicated slide that you see in front of you, but it shows the areas on screen which are the Big 10 academic alliances, open scholarship strategy areas of focus. We're currently aiming our sights on open publishing rather than open science or open research data. And these interventions include balancing the journal marketplace through data-informed decisions, strengthening our repository and publishing infrastructure within the academy, and working in partnership with presses to find a sustainable model for opening the monograph. What works for journals does not work for monographs, so it has to be a different solution. And we know that in order to be the community that we want to be, we always need to be working on elevating marginalized and unheard voices. Can I have the next slide, please? So narrowing down here, I wanted to talk about a project that Kate and I have been working on across our libraries and university presses to develop an 100-book open access collection on the topic of gender and sexuality studies. We've named it Big 10 Open Books. And this is, it's a small collection, but what we've been trying to do with this project is we've been trying to explore collaboratively between presses and libraries the sort of issues that open content and discovery has. And so this is a backlist opening backlist content from 6 of the 14 Big 10 university presses. And what we have worked through over the last year is having an evidence-based way of selecting the titles from backlist collections, clearing the copyright for open access online publication, create fully accessible EPUB 3 and PDF files, establishing a partnership with the Books Analytics Service to have a comprehensive understanding of usage, working to promote engagement with the collection, creating the metadata for books, partnering with JSTOR, Project Muse, and OAPEN DOAB, and working with Ex Libris and also EBSCO to create and promote the collection. And now we're really working on the communications about launch. There's lots of excitement about this project from the humanities scholars we're working with. And we're really trying here to promote the environment in which they work, libraries and university presses, and the need to work together to provide a sustainable model, working also with colleagues at organizations like Ex Libris. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is just a few practical details about Big 10 Open Books. It was officially launched on August 1st, and the collection data is available through partners such as Ex Libris, OCLC, and EBSCO. And we're working on inclusion in Google Books. And the usage data is actually aggregated via Books Analytics service dashboard. And I am putting into the chat the link here. Could I have the next slide, please? So this is just an image of the collection landing page. Next slide, please. So really scaling up from this one pilot, we're envisaging a future of OA monograph publishing, not enough coffee, sorry, that addresses these areas for collective action. These are shared pain points, and they're shared between libraries and presses. Together, we have the necessary shared expertise to address them. Expertise that is complementary and allows for imagining solutions to find, a sustainable funding model. Currently, our approach is a subscribe to open type model for books. Making the works discoverable and findable, a big focus of today's conversation. Setting and meeting the highest standards for accessibility. If we're serious about access for all, accessibility is a crucial part of open access. Preservation, digital preservation is always a challenge. Workflows that addresses the challenge with rights and permissions, and working for standardized usage data. And this is really, I think, aligning with some of the responses that we saw in the poll that Tamar just launched. Can I have the next slide, please? So we've been going since August 1st, and this is just to give a sense of the impact of these 100 books so far, the 100 books from the 6 presses. I should explain that we're using an open all the way through type approach. So it's open content, it's hosted on open infrastructure. So the Fulcrum platform that it's hosted on, run at University of Michigan, is completely open source. And the focus is on open distribution. So CC0 licensed MARC records, working with all the major partners in this area to distribute the collection over multiple platforms. The book analytics dashboard is really distinctive in that it pulls in data from those multiple platforms to give us a fairly holistic view of use. And you can see that we've had over 29,000 book and chapter downloads over 171 countries. And we also have a survey tool that is bringing in an increasing number of reader responses, which show that we're reaching people outside the academy, outside the usual barriers that we deal with in our institutions. Can I have the next slide, please? So the focus of the presentation so far has been on these metadata flows, and they are, as Tamar and Christine have noted, extraordinarily complex. But we're really working to have flows coming out of ultimately our central management system, the Fulcrum system, to all kinds of different locations. What's happening here with discovery systems is we're generating title lists within the collection to outline what's currently available, building a KBART file with a column called access type indicating closed or open, line by line showing whether it's free or restricted, and there are hybrid titles as well. So some of these titles were published, almost all of them were published restricted access, and now being made open access, but there are still for sale print editions, for example. Big Ten Open Books is entirely open, but our challenge is that these titles that constitute it have had different access restriction rules over the years. So feeds are very, very complicated. And finally, last slide, please. Thank you very much. And I should say that Kate is the very best person to really talk about this work. As a previous AUL for collections at University of Minnesota, she truly understands the flow question. And her email is here at the bottom of the slide, kate.mccready@btaa.org. And thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Charles. That was really enlightening. And thank you all for participating. I see there are a lot of questions in the chat. So let me just stop the sharing and take a look at the Q&A. Just a second. Okay. Okay, so let's start maybe, oh, the Q&A is here. Oh, okay, there's a lot of them. Let me just. Okay, what do you do to ensure the reliability of an open access journal? If you find out if a title is predatory open access journal, what do you do? Can you notify customers? Well, That's a good question. We usually add open access titles that are standalone titles that are being either requested by librarians specifically. If the open access journal is a publisher reaches out to us and asks us to add it to the delivery and the discovery, then we usually check how long it was published, and we check in Idea Exchange if anyone asked for it, if it's registered, if in the ISSN center. So there are several actions that we do. We don't really go into the articles and the the editorial board and see if there are approved and confirmed members. But usually the verification from libraries that this is content that is required, that's when we add it on our side. But like I mentioned, for Alma users, there's the community managed collections where you can freely add and update open access content, free content in the different collections. Another question, how often is the unpaywall content in CDI Quick Links is updated? I'll have to confirm that with Christine. I'm not sure.
I'm still here. I can answer
sorry.
that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so we harvest the data daily, but it's part of the bi-weekly update for CDI, so it's twice a week.
Okay, thanks. Where was the unpaywall content getting suppressed? I wasn't clear about
that. Yeah, that's about the bit record. So it's about the activation from Alma. It's really not specific to the unpaywall collection. This is just about collection activations in general. If you activate a collection and you want to see this in CDI, you have two options. One option, and that is for the database collection. One option is to activate it for CDI only, and then you don't need to do anything else. And I also saw that there were questions about unsuppressing the bit record. This is not necessary if you activate it for CDI only. If you activate it in general, not just for CDI only, then you need to unsuppress the bit record, because otherwise you're not going to see this on the result list. I hope this clarifies it.
Okay. So where was the unpaywall content getting? Oh, no, sorry, that we just answered. If you need to report a problem with the metadata in the unpaywall collection, should we report it to unpaywall or Ex Libris?
I think in generally to Ex Libris, because
Yeah.
I mean, we would be the first point of contact. I'm sure there are cases where we also have to refer to unpaywall, but I would open a case first of all to Ex Libris content team, and then we see from there.
You can also start in the chat. It's really helpful, and the answer is immediate, and then you know if it's something that we can solve or we need to forward it to unpaywall. Another question about unpaywall. If activating the unpaywall collection for CDI only, is unsuppressing the bib record necessary as well?
No, it isn't. You either activate for CDI only or you unsuppress the bib record.
Okay. Should we expect the link to a given article from the unpaywall API to be the same as the link from the CDI?
I'm not entirely sure that I understand the
Yeah,
question. I mean, the link that you get from the API would be the same link that is indexed from unpaywall in CDI. I would assume that this is the same, yes, if that was the question.
Yeah. Could you please explain again what the use case is for continuing to use the API in addition to activating the new collection?
Yes. So if you don't use the API, then the links will appear as every other link in record on the UI. So for example, if you use Primo, you have the full view, you have a list of links, and it will appear on the bottom there because it's a link in record, open access. So this is what's happening if you don't use the API. If you do use the API, then the link will appear on the result list on the record, the same way as it does today. So it will basically, with the result list, it will call the unpaywall API, it will pull in the link, and it will show it on the UI.
Okay, so another question, it would be helpful if the ERM had a link checker. It's technically very complex. We do use a link checker before uploading collections, but it doesn't always work. And sometimes just because Exlibris doesn't have any access to the provider platform, then the link fails. It doesn't mean that the links aren't good, but just we don't have the access. But I agree, it would be useful and helpful, but for now it's not a technical path that we can pursue. And a question about the AI tool you use for bib records enrichment. So we just started a pilot, and we took 1,000 titles as a proof of concept, PDFs, open access PDFs that we do have enriched bib records for. And then we ran an AI tool just to generate bib records. And since we already have good enough bib records, then we had something to compare it to. I'm hoping that the Q1 webinar on content would be on that. So but we'll have to wait for the results. And if we'll have something to share, then join us for the next webinar. Okay. So which is the recommended form of activation? I tried for an paywall. I tried activation in CDI only, but it did not seem to have any effects.
It should. If you want to see the entire collection activated and the records as available, flagged as available, then you need to activate it either for CDI only or with the unsuppressed bib record. So it should have worked. I don't know why it didn't show any effects for you. If you feel that it really doesn't work for you, then open a support case, but that should be the right way to activate it.
Okay, and a question about the workflows for title change notice. For example, a provider notifies that a title is going open access in 2024. So if it's just the one title, the question is, does it have any effect on the coverage? If it doesn't change the coverage at all, then the title is still available. The question is, if we'll have an open access collection from that said provider, then we would expect to have that title joining a collection of open access. But if we don't have a collection of open access, then the title will just stay in the same collection from that provider. The articles, however, will be mapped in CDI if they do have an open access option for that specific provider. And again, in this case, Unpaywall is very helpful because it just covers all the newly additions of open access. So a question on Paywall, when you say activate for the CDI only, then there's a collection ID on Paywall for CDI. There's another collection on Paywall.
I don't know the collection ID top of my head. But I think it's called Unpaywall for CDI. Yes, I'm not sure what the other collection is, to be honest. I would have to check with the knowledge base team.
So we'll check and we'll send a response. And another follow-up on Paywall. If you use the API in addition to activating the new collection, quick links will not work.
Oh, it will work. The rule for quick links with Unpaywall API is that quick links comes first. If there is no quick link, then the API will be requested and the links will be shown. So quick links has priority, but if because quick links is also your subscribed content. But if that's not there, then it's using the Unpaywall API.
Thanks. And we do have some more information here that it can take a few days for Unpaywall links to show because for the syncing changes process. And thanks for that.
That's a good point. So if you activate the collection, it's like every other collection activation or deactivation. It will take 24 to 48 hours before this comes into effect. Yeah, you need to take this into account. Thank you for bringing this up.
Yes, thanks a lot. And let me move to the chat because we also have some questions in the chat. The multi-row coverage statements are truly ugly and confusing. I agree. Is the availability calculation impacted in a negative way? I don't think it has any negative impact, only if the coverage gap is valid. I mean, if there is a volume missing and the availability calculates that this volume is available when it in fact it isn't, then that could lead to a false access statement. That's the only downside, but other than that, unifying the multiple coverage rows, we expect it to have a positive impact and be more usable. The polls don't stay active when I move on to, oh, I'm sorry. I thought the polls do stay active. If you have any more information or thoughts that you want to share, then please feel free to email me. I'll add my my email here in the chat. Sure, and I will reach out to whoever's interested in hearing more about the bib enrichment. Currently, there's not much more to share because we're still at the proof of concept stage, and we're checking and updating the prompts for creating the bib records. But we will let you know once we have some more information and results. And the question about the data source of data sets. Will open access datasets include data from open science repositories, or does Ex Libris have a plan to create open access datasets collection in ALMA? Not sure about the datasets origin. I'll have to check. I don't have an answer for that right now. Question, is it difficult to keep track of hidden title changes? What is your technique? Sorry, I'm not familiar with the hidden title changes. If you can either elaborate more in the chat or just send me an email, and I'll let you know. Will the links in the presentation be active in the recording? No, unfortunately not. The links for the polls will not be available in the recording, but if it's of interest, then let me know in an email and I can just, oh, the links. Oh, you mean the links for the knowledge articles, and yeah, they will be available on the PowerPoint presentation that will be shared as a PDF file. I can also share them now in the chat if it's if interested. Let me just go over the links in the presentation and I'll share it in the chat. Okay. That's the unpaywall for Summon. Paywall for Primo and CDI. General information from paywall, and see, that's the knowledge article on open access in CDI.
Tamar, there is also a question for Charles in the Q&A.
Sure.
Maybe you want to tackle this?
Yes, let's find that.
It's on the bottom, I think. Yes. Oh, almost the last one. Not the last one, almost the last one.
Okay, question for Charles. How is the Big Ten Open Books project and other similar projects sustainable? Where will the funds come from to support ongoing maintenance? Can university presses survive if their content is open?
Thank you, Molly. Those are very existential and good questions. So Big Ten open books is based on a modified subscribe to open model. So the idea is that libraries would be continuing to pay the equivalent of what they would have paid to to purchase the content, but the content instead goes open. That would be the longer term approach to opening these backlist collections. Of course, that has a number of issues embedded, and I think it's relevant to say that the future for university presses and open access will be hybrid funded models. So models where there will be some library support, whether by membership or subscribe to open type models, but there will also need to be parent institution support, and there will need to be a component of author payment charges so that the costs are spread across the system. I don't think a model where libraries pay open access for open access and all the burden falls on them is going to be sustainable. But there are some really interesting initiatives currently out there looking at these kind of hybrid approaches. And I put a couple in the chat. One is just a study that looks at the continuing sales of print books, even when the ebooks are open access. So that's one source of revenue that can continue. And there's also an interesting program from JSTOR, the Path to Open program, that looks at a kind of an embargoed model for university press books. And that looks quite hopeful as well. So I think there's a lot of experimentation. I think there's a flip side to the question, which is what happens if university presses can't publish open access? I think we enter into an environment where there's a real divide between the majority of scientific content and journal content going open access and the majority of book content staying closed. And that I don't think is good for society. So I think we need to work out ways of open access content coming from university presses. But I agree that this is a complicated area and there are a number of experiments in it. I think subscribe to open models are very attractive and interesting as a component of that funding. But thank you for that thoughtful question.
And here's another one for you, Charles. What are future subject areas for BTAA open collections?
Yes, thank you. We did a survey right at the start of the project of librarians and university presses in the Big Ten. Our focus is on interdisciplinary areas with a strong diversity, equity, and inclusion angle, where there are also substantial enough collections of books within the constituent university presses of the Big Ten. So we are thinking hard about a collection on Native American communities. We're also thinking about environmental justice as a potential collection. And we're also thinking about Asian and Asian American communities in the Great Lakes. So there are about 27 different suggestions. We're always happy to receive more, and we're trying to triangulate based on the availability of the content and interests in the institutions with a DEI lens. So we don't know for certain yet, but that will be the sort of area it will be in.
Great. Thank you very much, Charles. And we reached our time. I'd like to thank everybody for participating. I'll share the presentation, the recording, and the results of the polls. And if you have any questions that are unanswered, then please let me know directly in an email and I'll respond. Thank you very much and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.